So I want to introduce our final speaker in panel form, and that's Roger Cole, who's founder of the Peace Neutrality Alliance, long-time campaigner for Irish neutrality and for independent foreign policy. So he's going to put what we've been speaking of today in the context of now its relevance for the Ireland of 2018. So, Roger.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Ivara for this great conference, and I'm sure you all agree. Wolfe Tone's most famous pamphlet was an argument on behalf of Catholics in Ireland, and published in 1791. The year before that, he published a pamphlet arguing in favour of Irish neutrality. And to quote from it, then we should have what under the present system we shall never see, a national flag and the spirit to maintain it. So those of us who advocate Irish neutrality are part of a tradition that advocates neutrality, an Ireland of equals, a democratic Ireland and an independent Ireland that stretches back well over 200 years. I'm talking about Irish neutrality today, however, I'd like to start with a quote from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more or less. The question is, says Alice, whether you can make words mean so many things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, is which is master. That's all. So when we're talking about neutrality, words matter. Because, for example, the 6 counties of Northern Ireland are part of NATO since its foundation. So an exceptionally large part of our country has never been neutral. In the Republic of Ireland, several governments, most governments, up to recent governments, use the term, and I quote, military neutrality. This Orwellian term allows us to transform this state into a de facto US aircraft carrier. Nearly 3 million US troops have landed in Shannon Airport on their way to perpetual wars. Wars in which thousands upon thousands of men, women and children have been killed or injured. Now, the Irish Army is to be steadily transformed into a regiment of the emerging European Union Army. Now, neutrality is not an abstract concept. It's defined in the Hague Convention 5, Article 2, and I quote, belligerents that are involved in war are forbidden to move troops or convoys or munitions of war across the territory of a neutral power. When the ambassador of Switzerland visited Ireland in 2003 and was interviewed by the newspaper, she said that the reason why there were no US planes being landed in Zurich Airport was because of the Hague Convention. When Ed Horgan, the International Secretary of PATA, brought a case against the state for allowing US planes land in Shannon Airport, the judge, in his judgment, in a statement said, it is not in dispute that a portion of troops and munitions passed through Shannon Airport. And this is, quote, the 1907 Hague Convention 5 is asserted to be a declaratory, customary international law. So in fact, the term military neutrality, it's a bit like Humpty Dumpty speak, and should be treated as such. More recently, 4 members of the European Parliament, Fine Gael members, advocated a massive increase in military expenditure and a deeper integration into the EU defence union. saying, by the way, that they weren't in favour of a European army, which strikes me as more Humpty Dumpty speak. They also called for a debate on neutrality. But look at the history. When the first Nice referendum was defeated in 2001, the government were forced to establish the National Forum on Europe. And this forum greatly facilitated discussions on European Union and Ireland's relationship with that development, including military developments. But when the government lost the first Lisbon referendum, it was abolished. And of course then the second one, while they've spent millions of euro and have no forum in Europe to debate the issue, it's not too surprising that the second one got carried. Now, so if they were serious about having a debate about our relationship with Europe, and in particular the military relationships, then let's re-establish the National Forum in Europe. Another example, of course, is that PANA, because it's involved in politics, is affiliated to ZIPO. That's the state organisations that looks after expenditure on political matters. But another organisation, the Irish Institute for European Affairs, that is in favour of ending neutrality and is in favour of a European army, is not registered. And I'm sure it's just an accident. Their actual income per annum is €1 million. So, in talking about debate, you're really talking about more Humpty Dumpty stuff here. Because the Lisbon Treaty was essentially all about the process of the militarisation of the European Union, a huge step forward. It legalised the battle groups, the EU battle groups, and the European Defence Agency, and it allowed the formation of EU armies through PESCO, which I'm sure you've heard that word a bit more regularly these days. Under PESCO, for example, Germany is already on the way, well on the way, of creating a German-dominated EU army. The Czech Republic and Romania are respectively already integrating their 4th Rapid Deployment Brigade and their 81st Mechanised Brigade into the German 1st Army Brigade under German command. Thus, as early as 2021, there should be a 200,000 strong German-led EU army. Other states, like Ireland, are joining other permanent military formations. But there can be little doubt that in time it is planned that all these different permanent military units will merge into a single army under the EU military HQ, which has already been established. We should also know that the German Parliament commissioned a report in July 2017 that determined that Germany could legally finance the British or French nuclear weapons programs in exchange for their protection, as indeed the EU itself could have. After all, what's the point of having an EU army if it doesn't have nuclear weapons? The openly declared decision of the EU states that all the countries should increase their military expenditure to 2% of GDP. Even if Ireland increased its current military expenditure of 0.3% of GDP to the current level of 1.3% of GDP, which is the current average expenditure of the EU states, Irish military expenditure would multiply from 946 million to 4 billion. And if it went up to the target it's supposed to be reaching, the 2%, you're talking about 5 billion euros per annum. That obviously is going to have a major impact on the amount of money that could be spent on housing or health or education or any other welfare assistance. Now, let's be clear about the facts again. A Red C poll in February 2016, 57% of the people agreed that Irish neutrality be part of the Constitution, 39% said no, and 55% were opposed to the use of Shannon Airport by US troops. Thus, a clear majority of the Irish people in public opinion polls oppose the current drive to militarisation and the use of Shannon Airport by the US. And now that Trump is our president of the US, I'm sure you're very relaxed and happy about that. What we would be seeking is that in the next European elections, the issue of whether the Irish people want a European Union army, where we'll be spending somewhere between 4 to 5 million euros per annum, has to be an issue. And obviously there are a number of existing MEPs who don't agree that we should go that direction. And we would hope more of them would get elected. Also, you know, it's perfectly viable to be a member of the European Union without militarisation. The Danes have a protocol, it's part of EU law, that allows them not to pay for or involvement with any of the processes of the militarisation of the European Union. And I mean, this is Dublin City after all, and rumour has it Danes had something to do with its creation. So it seems reasonable that if the Danes can be not involved in this process of military union, then surely Dublin, Ireland as well of course, should allow itself to be not involved in this process. Now, Roger Casement, in his book The Crime Against Europe, which was a powerful critique of the imperialist 1914-18 war, called for a neutral Ireland, an inclusive Europe. He called for a Congress of Europe, a Europe that had all of the states in it. He believed that that's one of the key ways you achieve a peace in Europe, by having an inclusive Europe. A Europe that had Switzerland and Russia and the Ukraine and lots of others, all the states that are actually in Europe, be in the same Congress, if you're not going to have a war. Finally, John Redmond asked the Irish people to sacrifice their lives for the British Union and to join the army of that union. And as we know, many did and many died. Now, in January the 17th of this year, the current Taoiseach, in talking in a debate on PESCO, on this EU army, said, and I quote, "A Europe worth building is a Europe worth defending." So 100 years ago or so, the then major leader of Ireland was advocating that Irish people sacrifice their lives for the British Union. Does rancour? Is he saying the same thing when he says a Europe worth building is a Europe worth defending? Redmond asked us to defend the British Union. Many disagreed, and that's what this whole conference is about. You cannot force us to die for the British Union. And that is the core concept behind PANA. We do not want to die for an emerging European Union with its own army. Because armies are about, look, if you know anything about the history, not just of Britain, but of France, of Portugal, of Spain, of Italy, Germany, invading other people's countries, is what an awful lot of them have done for a lot of their times. So our case is that there's no need to go down that road. This time, of course, it isn't the German Hun, it's the Russian bear. But the concept is the same. We are being asked to go to war. Not necessarily immediately, but if you look at what's happening, that is the way they're going. And now, of course, with Trump and Bolton and Pompeo and Gila Haspel, even allowing troops, all of whom, by the way, support torture, let alone the troops going through. Is that the kind of future we're looking forward to? That's a question for all of you.
Roger.